In 1630, John Winthrop, who was governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, ran into a friend who was very distraught, and he said, I don't know what happened. My wife went insane suddenly. I don't know what caused this. And John Winthrop pulls himself up and he says, I can tell you why she went insane. She tried to read a book. And this pretty much encapsulates much of the colonial era's official attitude about women's capabilities and therefore about women's place in society. The general idea was that God, nature, and law and custom preordained the place for women in society, which was subordinate to men and in fact under men's control. What Winthrop was getting at was their version, if you will, of nature or science, which was that women had very small, weak brains, and those brains were not capable of rational thought. In the 17th and 18th century, rational thought meant moral, what we would call today moral thought, knowing right from wrong. So that in law, women, children, and idiots were viewed as non-compos mentis, not mentally capable. And that was what Winthrop was suggesting, that for a woman to try to read a book was beyond her physical capabilities, her mental capabilities. It was also believed that God had created woman to be man's helpmeet, we would say helpmate, and that it was, of course, Eve's fault that all manner of human disasters were brought upon the world. The general idea was that women, without a man to guide and control her, a woman would create chaos and destruction in the world. English people were not the only people with that mythology. We know about Pandora. Pandora's responsible for letting loose on the world death and disease and all manner of evil. So that women's job in life, that is women's destiny given to them by God, was to be helpful to a man. Her capabilities meant that she had to be controlled by that man. It had to be regulated because she didn't understand right from wrong. And then, of course, laws and customs grew up around these notions, or built on these notions, that guaranteed that women could never be, in fact, autonomous and could never be on their own. It was assumed that the mark of adulthood for a woman, the only mark of adulthood for a woman, was marriage and motherhood. Men had all kinds of markers in their lives. They could join the militia. They could be an elder in the church. They could get married. They could serve in political office. There were a whole series of things that marked adulthood for a man, but the only thing that marked adulthood for a woman was marriage and motherhood. And so the pressures on women were enormous. Also, as there was virtually little a woman could do on her own to earn money, marriage was the reasonable way to make sure you had a roof over your head. Women who didn't marry were seen and criticized openly as undesirable in some fashion. In New England, if you weren't married by the time you were 30, you were called a thornback. That is, you were so prickly that no man would have you. So generally speaking, the assumption was that a woman's destiny was to marry, to be a mother, and to be obedient and submissive to the wishes of her husband. The law made sure this was true because when you married, you became, in law, femme couverte, that is, a woman covered. And that meant that you couldn't sue or be sued. You couldn't own, inherit, or will property. You couldn't testify in court. Everything you owned that you brought into the marriage belonged to your husband, including your personal wardrobe, and your body belonged to your husband. So that you lost legal identity on the whole once you got married. If you were a Thornback, or if you were a widow, or if you were not married, you were femme sole, woman alone. Notice the implication there. Oh, how sad, you're a woman alone. And then you had these kinds of legal rights, because otherwise you would be a dependent upon the community. So women's destiny, if you will, was to serve the needs of her husband in every fashion.